ברוכים הבאים, שבוע טוב, and we are in Sefer Nechemia, and last week we learned Perek Vav, the 6th chapter. We skipped over Perek Hey, we skipped over the 5th chapter for a reason, which I'll explain very soon. Today, we're going to start Perek Zayin, the 7th chapter. We're only going to really learn the first 5 psukim, because the rest of the chapter is very repetitive, and then we're going to go back to Perek Hey, to the 5th chapter, and I'll explain why we did this whole jump and what the reason was in my opinion. Again, Be'ezrat Hashem. So let's start Perek Zayin, pasuk Aleph. Last week we actually finished building the wall around Yerushalayim. We gained security. Nechemia did what he came for. He came for one reason, really, to build a wall and to give a sense of security to Am Yisrael living in Yerushalayim and the outskirts. We saw the obstacles that he faced. We saw the terrible turmoil, the people around Sanballat, Toviah, and Geshem, how they really tried to devise and to assassinate him a couple of times. And every single time he was able to evade assassination. And finally, he was able to build a wall. So Perek Zayin, pasuk Aleph, really begins where we ended last week. So I'm going to read inside pasuk Aleph. Vayi ka'asher nivneta hachoma, right? Now that the wall has been rebuilt, ve'amid adlatot, vayipakdu hashoarim, ve'ameshorerim, ve'haleviyim. The gates had all been put in place, and the Beit HaMikdash, the guards, the members of the sacred choir, the Leviyim, and all of the people who were supposed to take some type of position in the Beit HaMikdash area took their place. Pasuk Bet. Now that there's security, now you can actually start running the city the way he would like. Pasuk Bet. Va'atzaveh et Hanani achi ve'et Hananya שר הבירה על ירושלים, כי הוא כאיש אמת, וירא את האלוהים מרבים. So Nechemia says, I put 2 men in charge of governing the city of Yerushalayim. One, my brother Hanani and Hananya. My brother doesn't necessarily mean his actual brother, but as some of our leaders, some of our members of parliament, our Anshei Knesset, like to say, Achai ve'achyotai, right? They say that a lot lately. Same thing here. He's just trying to use words that kind of bring achdut between all of the Jewish Israelis living in Yerushalayim. And he says, I would like to appoint these God-fearing Jews who can govern the city properly. Pasuk Gimel. Va'omar lahem, לא ייפתחו שערי ירושלים עד חום השמש, ועד הם עומדים ירגיפו הדלתות ואחוזו, והעמד משמרות יושבי ירושלים, איש במשמרו ואיש נגד ביתו. So I told these governors not to have the gates, now that we have gates, now that the city of Yerushalayim is walled, do not open the gates in the morning until after sunrise. Make sure you don't open up the gates beforehand. We don't want bandits coming in. We don't want any foreigners coming in. We want to make sure we can see who comes in. The second the sun rises, we have light. Then you could really determine who's allowed in the city, who's not allowed in the city, right? You want to have them closed, barred before the guards went off. You want to make sure that the shomrim come by, the guards, and he wants to appoint these guards, basically have patrols, posts, to make sure that we really are living in a secure city. So most of chapters of Perek Zayin, chapter 7, presents basically, as we're going to see very soon, a list of Shavei Tzion, a list that we have already read with minor changes already when Ezra Sofer came to Yerushalayim. And Nechemia addresses this list that we're going to see very soon in a context of a problem that he describes in these psukim that we just read. There's a problem. We want to make sure that we have shomrim, that we start to guard the city, right? And that's very, very important. Pasuk Daled brings a little bit more of the problem that Nechemia is now facing, now that we have a wall, now that we are secure, and he brings something to light that we didn't really think about beforehand. Pasuk Daled, V'ha'ir Yerushalayim rechavat yadayim ugdola v'ha'am me'at betocha ve'en batim bnuyim. So unfortunately, Yerushalayim did not grow as we would have hoped because of everything that was happening. Everything was going around. It didn't have a chance to really expand the city itself. We just learned last week that Nechemia built a wall on top of the ruins of the cities of the wall that was there beforehand from the first Beit HaMikdash HaRishon, right? For the Beit HaMikdash HaRishon. Because they were in such a hurry to make sure that they build it quickly so that Sanballat and Geshem and Tovia don't have the chance to basically send letters to the Persian Empire, to Artaxerxes, to halt. So he did it very quickly. So we now have a wall, we have an existing wall, which provides security, but only for a very small population, because in the city, the actual city itself, Yerushalayim, didn't grow. The population didn't grow. But what we really have is a large city, as far as the area is concerned. Yerushalayim Rabati, the actual land, is very big, very large, but few people are living in it. So there's a lack of houses for new settlers, because when new people come, they want to move in, but they can't because nothing was really built inside the walls. And the task of guarding the gates that we just read is a heavy burden on its residents. There's not many residents inside the wall, inside the city. Many lived outside the city, right? Because nobody felt secure in the city, and also Sanballat and all those. They didn't want people, really Jews, really living in the city. And now that we have a gated and a wall surrounding it inside the city, those who are now supposed to protect it, there's not a lot of people. Now, it's possible that Nechemia is trying to identify in the list of people that we're going to see, as if you look ahead in the Tanakh, it's a long list that we already read. He's trying to identify people in our chapter who don't currently live in Yerushalayim, but maybe might want to be persuaded, and maybe he can persuade them to move inside the walls. And this reminds us of something. What does this remind us of? Of wanting to populate an area so we can have facts on the ground so that our enemies don't take over. So who does that remind you of? What does that remind you of? Of modern day history, of Milchemet HaAtzmaut, right? If you recall, after Milchemet HaAtzmaut, the War of Independence, there was rubble all over the place, including in our neighborhood, Talbia, Emek Rafaim, the German colony. Many Arab residents of Talbia, they lost the right to their properties, to their land, due to Israel's absentee property law. The second we took over, 1948, they lost the ability to actually hold on to their land. And it became ours by law because of the treaty that existed and that was given to us by the British and by the UN. So the traces of the war after we succeeded in 1948 and its aftermath were still visible in the streets, right? The walls of the houses in our area, Talbia, Moshava, Gelanit, they were pierced with rifle bullets, abandoned orchards, and there were huge palaces in the Greek colony, for instance, Katamona Yeshana, that's where the wealthy Arabs of Yerushalayim used to live. Now, right now, the Arabs were driven out because of the war, and now it's empty. So Jews who had recently immigrated to Israel, or chayalim that were discharged from the military service from Tzahal after the 1948 war, they were basically given these properties. Literally, they were offered free of charge. Think of it. I mean, we live in such a Baruch Hashem, a beautiful high-end property area. The real estate is very high-end in Talbia, Mosheva Germanit, in Katamon. But in 1948, nobody wanted to live here. No one really wanted to live in these areas since it was close to the Jordanian occupation, prone to possible military strikes all the time, and it was full of rubble. It was a war. Think of it. This is where the war happened. So you had houses with holes in them. So nobody wanted to move in, but it was important for the Israeli government to make sure that we have facts on the ground. Israelis move into the area. So they practically gave all these homes for free. Now, at that time, the Yerushalayim area was not crowded, wasn't crowded at all. Not like today when we have to build, huge, Pinsker buildings that are, very, very high, so you can populate it. So, and between the houses were vast plots of land that were empty. So in the winter and the spring, you can see very, very much differences. So in the spring, these lots that were empty were green, and people brought their cattle to graze, or in the winter, it was flooded, huge puddles. And many of the streets were unpaved because the Arabs lived in this area prior to 1948. Some Arabs, some Jews, but they didn't pave the area, so nobody wanted to live here. And though it was important for us to populate the area, it was hard to bring people in. And I think we can compare this to Nechemia's short description that we just read that refers to the city of Yerushalayim, trying to recover from the trauma of destruction, mass abandonment of the population for about 100 of years. And now that we have a walled city, we need to repopulate Yerushalayim from those who are living outside. So although the construction of the wall created a relatively protected environment for the residents of Yerushalayim, the scarcity of population, the lack of, an old urban organizational culture, the lack of normal agriculture in the neighborhood, and also possibly the memory of destruction that people didn't want to live in Yerushalayim. It was full of, broken walls and rubble and boulders. So it made it very difficult to heal the city's growth process. And that's really what Nechemia is now dealing with. Now that he has a walled city, now that we have Yerushalayim, we have to populate it. Now, who's going to volunteer to move in to a place where just a couple of years ago, it was up for grabs, and there were battles, and the Shomronim, and Sanballat, and Tuvia, and there were, it was chaos. Nobody wanted to live. Now he has to move populations in, and that's, I think, what this whole Perek is dealing with. Is he needs to detect which people can he actually persuade to move in. So let's finish the next two psukim. Pasuk Dal we just read. והעיר רחבת ידיים וגדולה והעם מעט בתוכה ואין בתים בנויים. Yerushalayim was a large city, but not many people were living in it now. The new walled city, not many houses that would have been built, because don't forget, during the time of Nebuchadnezzar Melech Babel, he ruined everything, and it was very hard for any Jews to live inside. And now that we want people to move in, they have to start building. Pasuk Hey. ויתן אלוהי אל ליבי, ואקבצה את החורים ואת הסגנים ואת העם להתייחס, ואמצא ספר היחס העולים בראשונה, ואמצא כתוב בו. So Hashem inspired Nechemia. That's what he's always bringing Hashem into the mix. Hashem inspired him. He's telling us to assemble the people and the leaders, all the officials, to check from family records. Maybe we could find people who actually owned property in Yerushalayim, and maybe they want to come back to it. Maybe they want to rebuild their own homes, right? So he locates those records, and those of the first returnees those who came from captivity. Maybe from those people we can find people who owned land. And this is the information that he found. And now from Pasuk Vav all the way to Pasuk Ayin Bet 72, basically it's almost the same exact a list that we already saw and read in Sefer Ezra. So I'm not going to go through it now. It's really just a list of people that shows you that there wasn't a natural growth of people either in this area, because people were afraid. Maybe they were afraid to actually move in. So he's trying to find people willing to move in. At this point, I would like to now move to Perek Hey, the chapter that we skipped over. So go back to Prakim, go back to Perek Hey, and now we're in an area where you'll understand why I skipped it. We have Yerushalayim, we have a walled city, it's now secure. He's trying to find people to move in to Yerushalayim. And then all of a sudden, he realizes something that he might not have realized beforehand. You see, the sequence of chapters dealing with Nechemia's main task, which was building the wall of Yerushalayim, which is what he actually mentioned to Artaxerxes at the time, it was interrupted by this chapter, Perek Hey. Perek Hey deals with our leader, Nechemia, coping with social and moral problems among Shavei Tzion. Now, the message that emerges from this interruption, all of a sudden, he sees problems that he didn't notice before. Now, I think the message is that, and why this is in the middle of the building of the wall, right from Perek Dalid to Perek Vav, in the middle of the building, all of a sudden, this interrupted with this problem of economics and social problems, right? Is that the building of a wall may be extremely important for national security, economic resilience, the collective pride of the Jewish nation in the land that we now hold, maybe Yehuda. But in the absence of attention and commitment to social and moral questions, there's no hope for Am Yisrael. It's nice that we have land. It's nice that we have finally a walled city, or that we're building a walled city. But Nechemia, who came to Israel to build the walls of the holy city, finds himself now obliged to deal as a leader with problems such as that arises here in our chapter, in all its seriousness. The economy is not good and people are suffering. So, in the midst of building a wall to secure Am Yisrael, he realizes, what good is a walled city if my people, the Jewish people, are having such problems? And that might be why it appears in the middle of the construction of the wall. And maybe the message is that the problems presented in our chapter that we're going to read now, Perek Hey, cannot be postponed until the security situation is resolved. Why? Because lives are at stake, people's livelihood, mamash. So it seems that maybe Ezra, who we saw is one of the authors of the book Ezra Nechemia and Nechemia as well, are basically giving us a very strong message. We're building the wall. That's very, very important to us. But in the middle of all this, we have to use our eyes to see what's happening to Am Yisrael. And I couldn't have chosen a better time to read these prakim, because those are the real problems that we're having now with the Memshala, with our government. You know, we're putting together a package against Iran. We're dealing with Hamas and Hezbollah. But in the middle of all this, people don't have jobs. People are losing their jobs. People are in rent is skyrocketed. People can't buy housing, literally. So one of the complaints that a lot of the Jewish Israelis had of our government is, okay, enough with Iran. We need to deal with in-house problems. And that's really what Nechemia is now dealing with. He's dealing with the security, he's dealing with the wall, but he's also been told, and he sees, yes, but we have social problems. I mean, it's nice that we have a wall, but let's deal with the real problems that we have, right? But for reasons of clarity, I chose to learn Perek Hey only now after the wall has been completed, right? We completed, now I'm going back to Perek Hey. Now I think that even if what I just said is true, Nechemia might have postponed these economic problems until dafka after the construction was finished because of the surrounding nations, meaning Sanballat, Geshem, and Tovia. Because maybe he saw this is what's happening, but he said to himself, if I stop building it and I start dealing with the social problems that we have with the economy, with the poor, we're not gonna be able to finish the wall. So right now, after the Jewish people have a wall, they're confronted with the strains and tensions of life. And that's why I chose to learn Perek Hey after the completion of the wall, because maybe, I think, logically, even though the message, I think, is clear from the way it's built by Ezra Nechemia, logically, it seems to be that Nechemia first, with all the hurdles and all the problems, wanted to first get the wall done, completed, finished, and now he has the time, now that it's surrounded by a wall, he has at least some security left, he can now deal with the problems that exist. So let's see what these difficult problems that the people face are, and for which they're now complaining about. And perhaps also, it has to do with the differences, which we're going to see in a minute, of the wealthy classes among the population of Shavei Tzion. So let's open up Perek Hey, Pasukim Aleph. I'm going to read now Aleph and Bet. Okay? Vatehi tzeakat ha'am u'nesheihem gedola el acheihem hayehudim. V'yesh asher omrim, baneinu uvnotenu anachnu rabim, v'nikcha dagan v'nochela v'nichye. So sometime later, and that's why I read it after the binyan of the Choma, sometimes later, many of the people, men and women, began to complain against their fellow Jews. Some of them said, we have large families. We need grain to keep us alive. So the economic situation is very, very difficult. The poor are blessed with children, right? 4, 5, 6 children, but they have reached the breaking point. There's not enough food. Enters Pasuk Gimel. V'yesh omrim, Sdotenu ukramenu anachnu orvim v'nikcha dagan bara'av. Right? So others have said we have to mortgage our fields and vineyards and our houses just to get enough grain to keep us from starving to death. So now we're tapping a little bit into the real problems of Am Yisrael. Up until now, we dealt with the security, we dealt with the other nations around us, we dealt with, the Iranian problem that we have. And now Nechemia, who wasn't really ready for this, is now dealing with the regular run of the regular day-to-day problems that Am Yisrael have. A long economic crisis brings the poor to mortgage their fields, their vineyards, and still the hardship is unbearable to the point of starvation. Pasuk Daled, V'yesh asher omrim, Lavinu kesef lemidat hamelech, Sdotenu ukramenu. Still others said, it's not only that we have to mortgage our fields and vineyards, but we had to borrow money to pay royal tax to the Persians on our fields that we now mortgaged and gave to the wealthy, right? Pasuk Hey, ve'ata, because of that, ve'ata kivsar acheinu besarenu ki bneihem banenu. והנה אנחנו כובשים את בנינו ואת בנותינו לעבדים, ויש מבנותינו נכבשות Ve'en le'el yadeinu usdodenu uchramenu le'acherim. We are of the same race as other Jews, the poor, saying we're all Jews. But we have the wealthy that are taken from us. We can't even eat properly. Aren't our children, they say, aren't our children just as good as their children? But we have to make slaves of our children. Some of our daughters have already been sold as slaves. We see that from Parashat Mishpatim in our Torah, that when you have nothing left, you can sell your daughters as an Amma, as a Shifcha Ivriya. We're helpless because our fields and vineyards have been taken away from us. So not only can we not pay our debts and taxes to the Persian Empire, but we owe to the rich and to the wealthy. What can we do? The poor who have already borrowed money to withstand the heavy tax burden to the Persians have mortgaged their fields, forced to sell their sons and daughters as slaves. Now, slaves to whom? They're not selling their slaves to the Shomronim. They're not selling their slaves to, according to Nechemia, to Tovia. Probably, first and foremost, to the well-to-do Jewish brothers. That's who they're complaining about. They're complaining about the wealthy, or possibly even strangers, maybe Sanballat, people and their followers. They forcibly take over their daughters without consent, says Nechemia. Now, we spoke about the war of attrition, right? We spoke about that last chapter, which is really Perek Vav. We spoke about the war of attrition that we in modern Israel also went through and continue to this day. One of the ways Sanballat can win the battle or even win the war is simply wait until there is no more money. Wait until the poor, which is the majority of the people, can't even feed themselves, then come in. We know that Sanballat was very wealthy. Him and his people, they were the governor of the Shomron. Wait until they can't pay for food, and then you can take over without even lifting your knife. You're lifting any arms. Now, in stark contrast to the equal division of responsibility for the construction of the wall, we discussed that at length, how Nechemia was very smart, right? He divided and conquered, making sure that everyone partook in the building of the wall equally. And we saw that. It was based on whether they lived, where they lived, how far from the wall they lived, how many children per family. Now, the new Jewish society in the land of Yehuda is falling apart due to huge economic gaps that have been created over the course of all these generations, 2-3 generations. Now, if this problem is not solved, then there will be no value to a wall at all, which means that it doesn't matter if you have a security for the people of Jerusalem. It doesn't matter if you can protect them when they're crumbling from within because they can't survive, right? And that's what Nechemia is now dealing with. He has a walled city, but what does it matter if he cannot deal with what he has in front of him? The people are starving. But there's differences in the classes, the wealthy and the poor. But the poor are complaining that it's because of the wealthy that they are poor. How do you deal with that? So let's go to Pasuk Vav. Va'ichar li me'od. Nechemia is giving us some of he's talking to us directly, and he's saying, when I heard these complaints, I grew extremely frustrated, but more so angry. Vayichar, like Vayichar af Hashem. He was angry, not just frustrated, he was angry, mamash angry. Ka'asher shamati et za'akatam ve'et dvarim eile. So I decided to act, says Nechemia. Vayimalech libi alai, va'ariva et achorim ve'et asganim, va'omra lahem. We're in the middle of Pasuk Zayin. Masa ish be'achiv atem noshim, va'etein alehem kehila gedola. So I decided to act, says Nechemia. I'm not going to just sit in my throne and be happy with what I built and look at my successes. I'm going to get down and dirty and I'm going to act. We know that that's what he is. We saw that from the first 3 days that he arrived to Israel, to Yerushalayim, he acts immediately. So I decided to act, he says. I denounced the leaders and officials of the people and I told them, you are oppressing your own relatives. I called a public assembly to deal with the problem. נחמיה is not exactly the address for the cry of the people. He didn't sign up for this, right? If we recall, he wanted just to fix up the wall and give the Jewish population some sense of security. But he was now forced into this struggle, which he did not plan in advance, like he did plan to fix the wall, out of a powerful sense that the situation the Jews are in, immoral because of the wealthy, the different classes, indeed stems from the rich taking from the poor. And even, perhaps, it's dangerous for the continuity of the Jewish people in Yerushalayim. And we can see that in the conflict that has arisen between the poor and the rich, Nechemia chooses a side. Who is he going to choose, right? Lehavdil alfei avdalot, our leaders, sometimes, some people who are in places of power will choose the wealthy over the poor because they need the money. They'll suck up to the wealthy so they can get money, right? They'll come to their houses. They'll sit with them. They'll go out with them. They'll put their arm around them. They'll show that they're the best friend because they want something in return. They do, right? And this is a choice that Nechemia is doing, dafka, to side with the poor. A choice that cannot be taken for granted. I can only assume that his ties with the Jewish elite certainly existed because he shared with them, as we recall in the beginning, he shared with just a small number of families, the wealthy families, the ones that had power, the responsibility of the construction of the wall in the first place, because he knew where Sanballat and Tovia stood, and he knew about the ties, and he needed the wealthy on his side. We saw that in previous chapters. Therefore, it's quite clear that Nechemia had a commitment to the people, to the poor people, to the rich people, to the wealthy. He had a commitment to them. I assume they probably held it against him. We helped you when you needed it. We helped you, divide and conquer. We helped you protect. We even paid for some of the materials. Yet still, Nechemia stands by those who are in disadvantage, the lower class. He is a true leader. He doesn't just go with the wealthy because it's noach for him. He goes where it's needed. He's an honest and a good-hearted, caring leader. Pasuk Zayin, Pasuk Het. Ba'omra lahem, this is what he says to them. Anachnu kaninu et acheinu Yehudim hanimkarim legoyim kedei banu, vegam atem timkeru et achichem ונמכרו לנו, ויחרישו ולא מצאו דבר. So Nechemia says, as far as we himself has been able, we've been buying back our Jewish relatives who had to sell themselves to foreigners. Now you are forcing your own relatives to sell themselves to you, their own people. The leaders were silent and could find nothing to say. We are now being brought in a little to what Nechemia has been doing this whole time very quietly. The first time we're hearing what Nechemia has been doing under the radar. Nechemia chooses to confront the wealthy and upper class. He and the deputies as well, in public, in the presence of the community, in front of everyone. He does not ask the wealthy of Yehuda just for a handout. He doesn't want any favors from them. But what he does, he passes on to them some type of strict criticism. He wants to create an honest and a caring city. So what does he say to them? He says, we, meaning Nechemia, I'm going to tell you what I've been doing without you realizing what I've been doing, right? Nechemia says that he and his household, his entourage, right, has been redeeming Jews who were sold to Gentiles. That's what he's been doing, much as we could. Meaning, while he was building the walls of the city and all eyes was on that, he went around with, I guess, the riches and the gold and the silver that he got from the Persian Empire as a governor who controls the treasury. He's been buying and releasing Jewish slaves that were enslaved to foreigners. And maybe that's also one of the reasons why Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem were so upset at Nechemia, because he was freeing Jews. And therefore, he says to the wealthy community in Yerushalayim, you too, if I did that, if I bought back Jews to free them, so you are also obliged to sell the Jews that you have enslaved for their debts to you. That's very powerful. He's using an analogy, a very, very important comparison. Pasuk Tet. Vayomer, lo tov, vaomar, lo tov hadavar asher atem osim. Halo beirat Eloheinu telechu mechirpat hagoyim oivenu. And then he says to them, as far as he says to them, what you're doing is so wrong, because not only should you obey HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but what are you doing? The Gentiles around us, right? They're going to look at you and they're going to ridicule you. They're going to show you that you're ridiculous. Your leader is releasing Jewish slaves and you're enslaving them. So basically, Nechemia is saying to the people, the wealthy people, you must cease enslaving your poor Jewish brothers. Partly because of Yirat Shamayim, mamash, fear of God. That's the first thing he says, right? Because we learned that also from Shnat Shemitah, you're supposed to release all your slaves, but also because it will bring disgrace upon us all in the eyes of the Goyim, the Gentiles, who are hostile to us. Seeing how we behave towards each other, we become contemptuous in their eyes, disrespected, and it will only bring more hatred. And this too is something that we have been struggling with ourselves. Our Arab neighbors see us eating ourselves up within. They see how our biggest enemies are Jews within, starting from Har HaBayit, for instance, right? I don't want to get into politics, but we see many times the Arab population, they let our own Jews do the job for them. So Nechemia is turning to the wealthy and saying, if you're not careful, they're going to see that you are helping them conquer and get rid of the Jewish population in Yerushalayim. Pasuk Yud. Vegam ani, says Nechemia, une'arai noshim bahem kesef vedagan, na'azvana et hamasa hazeh. He says also, we too. He brings us something that we didn't know. He says that I let the poor borrow money from me. I'm the head of the treasurer. I opened up a gemach and I've let the Jewish poor people take from my gemach. And I'm going to tell you, I didn't take anything from them. I didn't take any rebate from them. They owe me money. They owe me personally, or my gemach that I created. They owe me, the courts. And Nechemia declares that either he waived any interest, or possibly he's not going to charge for their debt. He's not going to ask for the debt back. Basically, very strategically, he's trying to convince the upper class, the wealthy people of Jerusalem, to do the right thing. Now, I was taught as a mechanech, sure people here can identify, that any mechanech that is worth his salt must put his hands in his own pockets. I was taught by Rav Lichtenstein that a real true mechanech has to spend his own money sometimes and not always wait for it to come from those who owe it to him or from his bosses. Spend your own money on your own students, because when you do that, when you feel the loss, and you do it anyway, not only are you showing your seriousness and your real desire to care and help your students, but it transfers to your students as well. They'll notice, they'll see your dedication, they'll see how caring you are. And that's what Nechemia is trying to do, that I too I lent out my money, either my personal money or the money that I'm in charge of, and now I release the debt. I'm giving it to them free of charge, hoping that the wealthy community will do the same thing. Pasuk Yud Aleph. Hashivu na lahem ke'ayom sdoteihem karmihem zeiteihem uvateihem ume'at hakesef ve'adagan hatirosh ve'yitzar asher atem noshim bahem. He says the critical step required by this economic crisis, now that the poor people have found themselves in this terrible situation, is the return of land and houses to them so that they can continue to produce and perhaps somewhat repay their debt. Allow them the ability to grow crops. They'll work hard, they'll sell it, and then they can repay you their debt. But if you don't even give them their land back, how are they ever going to get out of the debt that they're in? In addition, Nechemia demands that the creditors waive some of the debt as well. Not the whole thing. Give them a hanacha, right? Even just 100th, 1% of the debt. So what would we say also today, right now in our government, if our government reduces interest by 1%? It's amazing. And as a testament to Nechemia, there is probably no real argument between the rich people of Yehuda and Nechemia. They accept his suggestion. That's what they say. I have nothing to say. Vayomru, in Pasuk Yudbet, Vayomru, Nashiv umehem lo nevakesh ken naaseh kaasher ata omer. Vayikra et hakohanim, va'ashbi'em la'asot kadavar hazeh. To ensure the wealthy follow through, I mean, if it was today, what would we do? We would go and get a lawyer. We would, to sign in the presence of both parties this new agreement, right? We would have everybody sign to make sure that you're mivater, you're reducing the interest, by 1% or by 2 or by 3 or 4, whatever. You can also allow them to. You will return their land to them so they can actually work and pay up their debt. But Nechemia doesn't create he doesn't use a lawyer. He doesn't, make an agreement like that. Instead, he uses the tool that was available to him at that time, which was basically swearing in the creditors before the Kohanim. It was very, very powerful. So the next pasuk is both a symbolic, maybe even theatrical gesture, and a very, very clear message. In pasuk Yud Gimel, what does he do in front? How does he swear them in front of the Kohanim? Pasuk Yud Gimel, Gam chotsni na'arti va'omra kacha yena'er ha'elohim et kol ha'ish asher lo yakim et hadavar hazeh mibeito umigi'o v'kacha yeh na'ur v'rek v'yamru kol ha'kahal amen v'yehalelu et Adonai v'yas ha'am kadavar hazeh. So he takes off a garment that he's wearing around the waist, I guess, and he says, and he shakes it, right? The shaking of the garment, or possibly even the pockets, symbolically shows that he's releasing some of the debt, right? He's showing his pockets. You too, you might deserve to be paid, but shake your pockets a little bit. Let some of the coins, let some of the money fall through, right? It's a way the leader expresses his message. And he basically says to the people, take an example from me. And he shakes his pockets and his garments in front of everyone. And he's saying in front of the Kohanim, I am willing to get, I'm willing to forego some of my debt so that the hardworking people can work and repay their debt to me. And then he curses, then Nechemia curses those who intend to refuse this so-called, I guess, Shemitah type of returning the karkaot, returning the land, so that they can work and pay their debt. Amazing what he's doing, right? Another thing, which is the possibility that possibly today, in today's day, with the resource that we have, is refuseniks, right? There's a way to if you have a refusenik, if you have somebody that doesn't want to pay his debt, you have to somehow get them to realize what they're doing. And he succeeds, and he makes them swear in front of the Kohanim, and he shows that he himself is doing the same exact thing in front of everyone. Now, Nechemia is not satisfied just with the symbolic act before the Kohanim, and therefore he decides to write all of this down in his diary. And this is some type of summary, starting from Pasuk Yud Dalid all the way to Pasuk Yud Tet. It's some type of summary of everything that he had to go through today. What he basically is saying is that a true, and we'll see it inside, a true public servant who deprives himself of the favors that maybe he deserves, that he's that he's allowed to by law. And I'm not talking about Balfour right now, right? Nechemia is aware of everything that he's owed. As the governor, he can build himself a big house. If you recall, also Artaxerxes said to him specifically, you can go build an enormous house for yourself as a governor. But Nechemia doesn't want that. He realizes that if he does that, he is no better than the wealthy people living in Yerushalayim oppressing the poor. He's aware of the pressures and the strain of his people, and he cannot afford the pleasures of power. Meaning, no cigars, no champagne, no help. That's basically what he's saying in his last 5-6 psukim of the era that he's in right now, as summarizes. So let's read it inside. Pasuk Yud Daled. Gam miyom asher tzira oti lihiyot picham be'eretz Yehuda mishnat 20 ועד שנת 32 לארתחשסתא המלך שנים 12. אני ואחי לחם אפיך לא אכלתי. He's saying, during all of my 12 years that I was governor of the land of Yehuda, from the 20th year of Artaxerxes until the 32nd year, neither me or my relatives, we didn't eat, food, champagne, and, the best of the best that I was entitled to as a governor. I ate everything that everyone else ate. פסוק ט"ו, והפחות הראשונים אשר לפניי הכבידו על העם ויקחו מהם בלחם ויין אחר כסף שקלים 40 גם נעריהם שלטו על העם ואני לא עשיתי כן מפני יראת אלוהים. Every governor that came before me who had been in office had been a burden to the people and had demanded 40 silver coins a day of food and wine. Even their servants had oppressed the people. But I acted differently because I honored God. It's amazing because we just heard the complaints that people had about Naftali Bennett, about building his fortress, and Bibi Netanyahu building his fort and taking cigars and all this. We keep on hearing how leaders have the privileges, and what do they do with that privilege? So Nechemia is saying, I had the privilege and I forego it. I let go of the privilege. I didn't take anything, nothing. Pasuk Zayin, all because of Yirat Hashem, he says, my honor towards God. Pasuk Zayin 16, וגם במלאכת החומה הזאת החזקתי, ושדה לא קנינו. וכל נעריי קבוצים שם על המלאכה. And he says, I put all of my energy into rebuilding the wall, and I did not acquire any property. Everyone who worked for me joined in the rebuilding. I didn't take anything. I didn't take a maskoret. I did it strictly because I knew that it had to be done.
Rabbi, who is he speaking?
He's telling us.
To, not the
He's summarizing. No, he's summarizing up until now, everything. He wrote this in his diary. Like I said before, It wasn't enough that he shakes his pockets symbolically and shows everyone that he himself has no more money. He himself is not a rich man. He shakes his pocket and says, I have nothing. I didn't take anything from you. But he's telling us what he wrote in his diary because he wants those who come after him to read what a true leader is supposed to behave, how a true leader is supposed to behave. Pasuk Yud Zayin 17, והיהודים והסגנים 150 איש, והבאים אלינו מן הגויים אשר סביבותינו על שולחני. He says, I regularly fed at my table 150 of the Jewish people who were poor, and the leaders as well, besides all the people who came to me from the surrounding nations. Meaning, I opened my house to them, I gave them from everything that I owned and that I had. A true leader. We're tapping into the human being behind the leadership, the man with the throne. Pasuk Yudchet 18, ואשר היה נעשה ליום אחד, שור אחד, צאן, 6 ברורות וציפורים נעשו לי, ובין 10 ימים, בכל יין להרבה. ועם זה לחם אפיך לא ביקשתי, כי כבדה העבודה על העם הזה. He says, every day I served meat, 6 of my best sheep, many chickens, and every 10 days I provided a fresh supply of wine for others, not even for me. But I knew what a heavy burden the people had to bear. And so I did not claim the allowances that every governor is entitled to. He says it again, so we realize what a leader is supposed to, how a leader is supposed to behave. In the last pasuk of the perek, Zacherali Elohai letova. He's a God-fearing Jew. I pray to you, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, remember what I had done. Remember what the credits. Remember what I did for to succeed. Kol asher asiti al ha'am hazeh. Everything that I did for the people that I love so much, for Am Yisrael. That's a true leader, one who brings security to the nation, who takes care of the poverty, who takes care of the social realms that exist, and also somebody who doesn't take more than he needs to eat. Somebody who doesn't take more than he does. He might deserve more because of the position that he has, but he understands what he should really do as a leader. And he writes these last 6 psukim in Perek Hey is really a testament to how he believes a true leader is supposed to be. So, Be'ezrat Hashem, next week we're going to start Perek Chet. We're going to skip. We're going to go forward to Perek Chet, chapter 8, which is a brand new noseh, a whole new topic of spirituality. Up until now, he very much did his own thing, regardless of anything that Ezra Sofer did beforehand with building the spiritual atmosphere in Yerushalayim. נחמיה was a totally different kind of leader. He cared about the physical aspect. He cared about the security. He cared about poverty. He cared about the social situation in Yerushalayim and the outskirts. But now in Perek Chet, we're going to tap in a little bit more into the spiritual realm, and then we're going to be meeting Ezra again, which we'll discuss at length. Did they really meet? Did they not really meet? But either way, Be'ezrat Hashem, next week, Perek Chet. So Shavua Tov.